started. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody, for this webinar. We are very, very happy that we get to do this and that we get folks from, as we saw in the chat, from all across the United States, all across diversity of experiences as well. And so we're hoping to really tap into that during our webinar today. Who's on the call today? Who are we? My name is Rani Banjarian. I am a consultant here at Education Elements. I'm based out of Nashville, Tennessee, but I am currently, if you can tell, I'm in a hotel room. I am currently in San Antonio, Texas. I am one of my district partners that I work with on blended learning implementation is Northside ISD. And I am very, very happy. I'm feeling very blessed with the weather today here in Texas. Nashville has been gray and gloomy and rainy over the past couple of weeks, but I landed in Houston yesterday, and lo and behold, it has been some beautiful fall weather. So special hello to all of our folks who said in the chat they are from Texas, because I am here with you enjoying the fall weather with you as well. Very, very briefly, a little bit about me. I love, and I've been involved with all of the work that we do at Education Elements, but I have a special love for data culture, specifically working with school districts on their data culture, building a strong and sustainable data culture. And then more recently, in some of the work that I've been doing, helping school districts develop, design, and deploy user-centered data collection tools and data displays. So that's the angle that I'm coming into this conversation with. And I'll pass it on to my wonderful colleague, Katie, who will introduce herself as well.
Thanks, Rani. Good morning, everyone. I am so excited, as Rani is, for you all to join us today. My name is Katie Rediger. I am a partner at Education Elements, coming to you from Reston, Virginia, about 30 minutes outside of Washington, D.C., but started my career in education actually in Atlanta, Georgia, as an elementary school teacher. Did that work for several years and then transitioned out of the classroom back to go to school, back to school, I guess I should say, and concentrated my area of research in children's mental health, and then spent the last really almost 15 years now helping school districts think about, similar to what Rani shared, data collection best practices, surveying, thinking about the areas of student engagement, family engagement, and employee engagement, and most recently thinking about how all those practices come together around strategic planning and engaging your community in that process. So really, really excited to be here today. We saved the best intro for last. We are so honored to have Dr. Lavelle Brown join us today as kind of our guest speaker. Dr. Brown is the superintendent at Ithaca City School District in New York. I personally have worked and known Dr. Brown for, gosh, almost 10 years now, supporting him with school-wide surveying, thinking through best practices around communication and customer service. And recently, I've had the privilege of hearing him share some of his research that he leads nationally in the areas of equity and equitable practices with school leaders. So Dr. Brown, I'll pass it over to you just to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Katie, and thanks to all the folks at Education Elements for giving me this opportunity to share and to learn. Yes, I am currently a sitting superintendent. I've been in Ithaca, New York, Central New York for 11 years now. Wow. That picture, I look much younger in that picture too, by the way. But I've been doing this work for 11 years as superintendent, but I've also had the great fortune and privilege of working with educators. At this point, I've been in all 50 states and 17 different countries, engaging in conversations about strategic planning and equity and inclusion and cultural responsiveness. So just happy to be here and looking forward to learning and then sharing some stories from my implementations. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Brown, for being here. So we took a minute, we introduced ourselves. Just wanted, if Education Elements is new to you, just wanted to take a minute to introduce the company, our mantra or our belief at EE is that schools grow when people grow. And how we support that growth looks different depending on the project. As you can see, we work with school districts across the country in the areas of really helping them kind of tackle change management. And that change might be implementing personalized learning. It could be thinking through new ways and innovative ways to recruit and retain teachers. It could look like strategic planning and strategic implementation. But regardless of kind of what that project or service looks like, what we hold constant is our responsive methodology. And you'll see that framework at play today here when we kind of share some of the thoughts that both Rani and I have in thinking about new ways and creative ways to implement your strategic plans.
And you know, one thing we've learned over the course of the past year is that it is always so important to innovate when it comes to leading these virtual webinars and leading our lives virtually for so long. If you've been in one of our webinars recently, this slide might be familiar to you, but if not, this is something we tried out and folks really resonated with folks. And so throughout the course of our conversation today, if Dr. Brown or myself or Katie or anybody else in the chat, anybody else from our participants shares an idea or a thought, get those hashtags ready. Let us know how you feel about these ideas with these hashtags. So we propose that if you have a new idea or you've gained a new insight, use that hashtag AHA. If you have a different opinion you want to share, or if you want to push back on something that was shared, use a hashtag debate. If you need clarification on something that was shared, or you have a question, use the hashtag question. And this is the best, we're saving the best for last. If what we're saying really is boosting your ego, or it's something that's resonating with you, resonating with part of your practice or something that's currently happening in your context, hashtag on fire and give yourself some props as well. So these are the 4 hashtags. When you're typing in your comment, just start your comment with any of these hashtags. So we know what it is, the sentiment that you're coming to that conversation with. We are monitoring the chat as well. So please feel free to put your thoughts in the chat as they come to you. And then there will be moments in this presentation embedded where we will ask everybody to do some reflection and put their thoughts in the chat as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rani. So just taking a minute to kind of frame why we're here today, what the conversation is about. And I'll a hashtag aha moment that Rani and I had recently as kind of 2 data geeks having a conversation, realizing that, you know, so much of my time is spent around helping school districts with strategic planning. And as Rani shared earlier, a lot of his time is centered around helping school districts build out a robust data culture across their system. As we were both kind of chatting about projects that we're on, we had a moment where we realized, you know, I bet we can take some of our best practices from strategic planning and some of our best practices from building out a data culture and put them together to help our partners better implement their strategic plans. And if we did that, if we borrowed from both of those service lines, put them together kind of mashup style, what could we learn from one another that could really help our school districts face or implement their plans that we've often heard from our partners is a challenge. So much time and resources are spent in thinking about, you know, that planning process. But then it's difficult, and often what we've heard from our partners where they'll run into roadblocks or fall short of delivering on some of what they've put in that plan. So what we're hoping today to kind of shed some light on and share with you, really just in more of a beta kind of testing these ideas type of way, what we have found to kind of borrow from 2 service lines, put them together, and think about how to help you all with implementing the strategic plans that you just spent so much time and thought crafting. So I think so starting with strategic planning, and the flow of this is, let's first kind of introduce what do we mean at Education Elements with strategic planning? What does that practice look like? Understanding how we approach that work, then figuring out what can we borrow from what we know to be a best practice and apply later with implementation. So often that you'll know if you've worked with us with strategic planning, we are constantly saying that investing in the planning process is just as important as the end product, the plan itself. So what do we mean by that? What is the process itself and how should it look? So the next slide here will kind of outline our belief statements is regarding thinking about how we approach this work and what we feel is most important when you're tackling writing your strategic plans and that planning process. And so we know that involving all stakeholders in the process is incredibly important. Some of the best research regarding family engagement says that families are most engaged when you do with them, not to them or for them. And so applying that research to how we plan and write our strategic plan is just as important and relative, including the community, making sure that all perspectives and all voices are consulted and included in the process. Knowing that along the way that not only at one point are you consulting your community, but you're giving them the opportunity to share feedback and be part of the designing process along the way. We know that when stakeholders, students, parents, teachers, non-parent community members are involved in the planning process, our partners face less challenges, lower friction, and more investment and buy-in when they actually go to implement the plan. We also know that creating a process that is responsive, that tackles the planning process in kind of bite-sized pieces that we refer to as sprints is incredibly important. And thinking about how do you build in those adjustments along the way if you need to make a pivot or a change during that planning process. Finally, we know that communicating, in some cases over communicating the planning process is so important. Sharing your timelines, why now? What's the importance of strategic planning? Why is this vision and mission for the next 3 to 5 years so critical to the success of students and the success of the district? Communication we know is king during the planning process. So in general, sitting back and thinking about these belief statements really rolled into one is that your plan, the planning process needs to be what we call is responsive. It has to be agile. It has to allow for, go to that next slide for me, Rani. It needs to allow for you as you're writing your plan to, again, be able to adapt and pivot along the way, which will help in the long run, thinking about the sustainability of your plan. And so as you're thinking about, we'll revisit these 4 belief statements as we begin thinking about strategic practice later. But how can we take that responsive planning process, those 4 belief statements that I just shared, what can we borrow from those practices and apply to implementation? And so I'm curious to hear from you all a little bit more about your experience with implementing your strategic plan. So putting yourself in the story here, you've just spent a lot of thought and time, energy, resources, writing your strategic plan, and now you go to implement that plan. Share with us in the chat a little bit about that experience, good, bad, and ugly. What are some early wins, some success that you've had with that plan, some tips or tricks you could share, or also what are some hurdles that you ran into along the way that others could learn from? And feel free to drop those in the chat.
What do you think, Katie? Ready to move on?
Perfect. Yeah, let's switch gears over to data culture.
Thank you, Akribi. We have had the really marvelous opportunity over the past couple of years to develop a data culture service line. We found that a lot of our district partners had a lot of data. A lot of them were coming to us and saying, hey, we have a lot of data. We don't really know what to do with it. We have a lot of data. We don't really have a lot of information. And we want to glean insights from all this data. And we came together and we developed a data culture service line. And we've been able to partner with a couple of our district partners on developing and sustaining a strong holistic, and user-centered data culture. Our core tenet for that is that our belief in that a strong data culture in schools and districts can lead to more informed and more equitable decisions about how to improve educational experiences and outcomes for all students. It's not enough to have data. It's not enough to have spreadsheets and numbers and multiple data streams and all of this information that we're collecting if we're not using it to inform equitable decisions that impact every single one of our students and every single tier of our stakeholders. We need to think about all of the human factors that surround the data that we have that would, we talk to our district partners and they say, we have a sea of data, but why can't we see that reflected in our outcomes? And so we need to bring in those human factors and that human understanding in order to ensure that we're making decisions that impact equity for all students. The piece about, when I first heard it, data culture, I was like, that is such a cool term, because I come from a more technical background in terms of data analysis and analytics too. And it's like, what are all of the human components of this culture surrounding data? And when we think about culture in your classroom, culture in your school teams, culture in your district, culture is a collection of beliefs and norms and spaces and values and resources. And when all of these things come together around data, we create a strong and equitable and inclusive data culture. What are the beliefs that our district and stakeholders have around data? What norms, if any, do we have to practice data, around data that we have consistency around? Are there any spaces where we can talk and discuss protocols around data culture? Are there any easily accessible repositories for data? Do people know where to go to look for specific data? What are the values that we hold to be true around data? And what are all the resources that we have access to as a district and all of the tiers of stakeholders when it comes to accessing data? And so we came together and we developed this compass around the six, what we believed to be the six guiding principles and pillars for data culture. Data culture needs to promote equity and inclusion. Data culture needs to be holistic. It needs to be responsive. These are all terms that Katie was just talking about when it came to a strong and successful strategic planning implementation, strategic plan. Data culture needs to be user-centered. If you want to communicate data to families and parents, you have to understand how it is that your families and parents in your community read and understand and digest that data. Data culture needs to be sustainable. And I think most importantly for our conversation today, data culture needs to be aligned with all of your other initiatives. Specifically today, it needs to be aligned with your plan to implement your strategic plan. And so in the chat, and I'm seeing lots of chats coming in. And while you put your responses in the chat, we'll take a moment to respond to everything. Think about this question: what practices can we borrow from building a strong data culture and apply to implementing our strategic plans? So thinking about this compass and all of these six elements, what practices can we borrow from that compass that we can apply towards implementing our strategic plan? And I'll give us a song's length to respond to this question.
And thinking about how to be in that space with both those things. I think that's a really, really important point.
And that call out about substitute teachers as well, which I've never really considered. Thank you, Michelle. Katie, are we ready to move on?
Yeah, I'm so caught in these in this chat, but yes, we'll move on just to be thoughtful of everyone's time. Thank you all so much for, as Rani said, sharing with us your experiences and how you're connecting to kind of what we're sharing today. So we've taken a little bit of time. We've kind of introduced strategic planning, how we know it, how we do it at Education Elements. We've talked about our data culture service line, how we approach that work, thinking through those 6 essential elements. And now what I want to do is kind of, as I said earlier, bring those 2 things together. Bring some of those practices over that we know to be best practices from strategic planning. Bring some of those best practices for building out a data culture across your system. And how do we apply both those things and put them together to think about implementation? And so when we do that, what Rani and I kind of discovered is that they fall into these 3 kind of big buckets. The first bucket there is just being to identify and name. We talked earlier and we saw numerous times in the chat, this idea that data, the numbers become so powerful that you forget the story or the human side behind the numbers. And so taking time to not only look at the data itself, but to identify and name those essential behaviors and practices associated with those numbers, right? The numbers are the outcomes of a specific behavior or practice. Name it, identify it early on. It will be so critical in thinking about the sustainability of building out a data culture. Second, communication. We talked earlier about, specifically with strategic planning, this was one of our core beliefs, was the importance of communicating the planning process with your entire community. And I think what often happens is we're so intentional about how and when and to whom we communicate during the planning process that we grow quiet during the implementation process. And so how are you communicating your implementation with your community? How are you celebrating success? How are you spotlighting growth and progress? And also, when are you naming an opportunity where something didn't work and you're reflecting to potentially pivot in your implementation, and sharing that as well and naming it and owning it with your community? So being very mindful about communication during the implementation process. And finally, as we talked earlier about identifying those essential behaviors, making sure that you do that crosswalk between, here are the key metrics associated with each of my initiatives outlined in my plan. Here are my metrics. Here's what these metrics look like, sound like, feel like. These are the human practices associated with each of these metrics. Okay, I'm going to track the data in a very meaningful way that is user-centered, that is holistic. But I'm also now going to provide coaching and mentorship on these essential behaviors and practices that I know drive the desired outcomes. So these are the kind of 3 big buckets that we have found our work to kind of fall into. And I want to move into thinking about, like, how do we unpack these big buckets? What does this actually look like in practice? And so for Rani and I, who again are kind of playing with this concept of stealing what we know to be best practice from strategic planning and from data culture and putting them together. And what we've done is, if you've worked with us before, you know that this is really the framework that we use to approach all of our work. We start with planning and aligning. And essentially, before you go to think about making adjustments to your own data culture, you need to know what it is first, right? So starting there, evaluating what the current data culture is. And so I know when we do this work, when we partner with school districts to come in and kind of think about, get a lay of the land around their existing data culture, that can look, and Rani, you're probably the best one to speak to that, but that can look a couple different ways, both in some new data collection, as well as really building out an inventory, right, Rani, and thinking about how to define that existing data culture.
Yeah, absolutely. In the same way that we start a strategic planning partnership with a district, we first want to get a lay of the land, the landscape of all of the data processes and practices. And so we do a pretty wholesale round of stakeholder engagement around those beliefs and values and norms and resources that we talked about, those aspects of the data culture. And then we also collect a data culture inventory. What are all the things? So we collect the ideas and the thoughts, and then we collect the things. What are the repositories? What are the resources? Where do people go? to access specific types of data. And so those two in tandem then work together to give us a pretty good idea of the landscape of data culture before we start working together. And I see in the chat, these slides will be sent out at the end with along with the recording, so you'll have access to all of this information as well. And so just to very briefly walk through the storyline of our partnership then. So we start with planning and aligning. We move to foundations where we really come in and we talk about what data culture is, what are the components of data culture. We think about the trends that we have collected from our stakeholder engagement, and we identify alongside our district partners, these are maybe 3 or 2 of those 6 compass heads that we should focus on in the first year or in the first 2 years. Then in design and implement, we come together with those school teams, with those district teams and say, okay, we know about human-centered design. Why don't we come together and start prototyping a new thing, a new product, a new protocol, a new data idea or a resource or a space or a communication flow or a flow chart, anything that we think can positively impact the components that we identified as the highest leverage components. And then in reflect and iterate, much like in all of our other work, our district partners go apply, they collect the data, they come back and say, this worked and this didn't. Let's do an adjustment. So it is an iterative process. And we've had a chance to do that with several of our district partners. And it's been really wonderful to see how invested so many of our partners have been in not only their strategic plans and all of the other work that they do, all of their other initiatives, but really coming together and coming to the table and say, hey, we want to build a strong data culture as well.
Yeah, and I love, Rani, I'll just call out too, and you touched on this, but it aligns so well with a comment that was shared in the chat, is that in the foundations phase, making sure that you do the hard work to develop that shared vision of what a data culture is. And so someone shared earlier that this idea of when your vision or your mission is vague, or it's not well defined, or people aren't completely bought in or invested in the creation of it, then when you go to actually implement or prototype during that design and implementation phase, you lose folks. And so that's such an important part of kind of building that foundation, is making sure that you do that work to create that shared vision. So as Rani shared, this is really that framework that we use and how we approach all of our projects. And so I think without further ado, for sure, I want to hand it over to our friend, Dr. Lavelle Brown, who certainly there is no one better who can kind of walk our talk here and share the stories, his stories from his time since 2011, being at Ithaca City School District, and his experience with both the planning process as well as the implementation process. Dr. Brown, I'll hand it over to you.
And thanks again, Katie. And this was very informative and affirming, because what you described was much what we've gone through over the last 11 years. And I will start with, this was never a check the box exercise. It's always ongoing. We approached it in that way. We said to our community early on that a strategic planning process, or the strategic thinking associated with it, is always going on. And the process is always more important than the product. We don't want just another 3-ring binder with a strategic plan in it to sit on a desk, gaining some dust. We want to be able to live and breathe strategic thinking. And I will say our process, and the one we've done here in Ithaca and the one I've been now facilitating across the country, it always starts with that vision and mission. How do you produce a vision and mission? And see, that's important. The vision, that bold, audacious statement that the organization is going for. And the mission is what you will do over and over again to achieve that vision. See, in my community, we spent 1.5 years just on that. In the beginning, again, the process was more important than the product. We conducted dozens of community conversations, and none of them were taking place in schools. We were going to community centers, homes, barbershops. I remember at the time I had a lot of hair, but pandemics and everything else as a superintendent took that away. But at the time I was in barbershops having conversations with folks about what they wanted to see in their schools. And it resulted in us having a vision and mission, a vision of 6,000 plus thinkers. We had to define thinking. Everybody says thinking, but how many folks actually go so far as to define it? Solving complex problems, new solutions, collaborating with folks who are different than you, recognizing your own blind spots and biases. See, that's a part of our definition for thinking, recognizing the multiple perspectives and differences in relationships. See, as we define thinking in that way, it pushed everything else for us. The mission, what we'll do over and over again to achieve that kind of vision for everyone, well, you got to engage, educate, and empower. And see, yeah, we define those words. And if I had more time, we would go into the definitions of those. But everyone in our community now, I can say it, everyone in this community has a t-shirt, first of all, that has the vision and mission on it. And they can describe it to folks who walk up to them in a produce line. See, when you can describe what it means to be engaged, what it means to be educated in 2021, what it means to be truly empowered, that kind of voice and choice for our young people and adults, you know then what it takes to become a thinker. See, that's vision and mission work. And it took us a year and a half to establish that common mental model, which then led to the systems and systems thinking. See, the systems, what workflow, what people, department, workflow. See, it's traditionally called strategies. With traditional strategic planning, we call it systems. See, what's going to be in place to allow for you to do this mission? And see, for us to establish those systems, our resource allocations, we're focused on building up systems, improving systems, creating new systems. And then it gets down to the systems thinking. So for us, that's the data. Those are the accountability metrics. What is it going to be the ways in which we will continuously improve? We oftentimes say, what's in your data portfolio? You see, as I said, it's never a check the box. We're always thinking about how we continuously improve. And we use our systems thinking, our data, we use those metrics to continuously improve. More importantly, we use those metrics to learn and not judge. See, that was another key part of this, because involving the community up front and saying that we're going to always involve you, we had to involve our community in the conversations about accountability metrics and data. You see, if we're going to use that data to learn versus judge, then we're going to have to change the ways in which we ask questions. We will have to facilitate using some protocols. See, yeah, anyone can find data that says the superintendent and the school district isn't good. I can find that data right now if you want to get rid of the superintendent. But how do we use our data to learn and to grow together? See, that's the shift we needed to make as a community. And see, as we established some protocols for looking at data, we talked about what kind of questions we will ask. We came up with, and I'll put some things in the chat here. We established what we call an equity report card. You see, for us, it's about all of our young people being successful. And we are going to be an equitable organization. That's our vision. And see, we got to establish some metrics, some quantitative data points that will give us an indication of where we are when it comes to our vision and mission and providing equitable opportunities for every one of our young people. And those indicators, graduation rates, attendance rates, enrollment patterns in our highest level courses, enrollment in co-curricular opportunities, see things that our community embraces and appreciates and wants to know about. And then we, in partnership with our community and in partnership with our young people, we came up with some qualitative measures as well. See, we capture those qualitative metrics each and every year through surveys. And Katie, you know these surveys well. Where we ask our young people what they think about our school district. Do you have someone that you can connect with? Do you see yourselves represented on the walls and in the spaces in the curriculum? Do you see our curriculum being culturally responsive? Do you see this as being challenging? See, those are the questions we know our young people are asking us to be better about. Those are the things our young people are holding us accountable for. They have to be a part of our data gathering and data culture. So quantitative and qualitative. And see, those are the data points that we continue to look at over and over again to give us an indication of whether or not we're achieving our vision and mission. So if you take nothing from me today, just think, when you think about strategic planning, think about strategic thinking. Think about, I'm not checking a box right now, but this is instead a way in which our organization will work each and every year. And it's going to always be about our vision for teaching and learning. And then how we're going to achieve that vision, our mission. And then what systems are going to be in place? What systems are going to be in place to provide us some flexibility to adjust to pandemics, to adjust to emerging technologies, to adjust to the evolving needs of our young people who are becoming more and more diverse each and every day. Those are the systems. And then how will we hold ourselves accountable? System thinking, accountability metrics. Everything we do, everything great organizations do should be able to be placed on one page. and we have our stuff on one page. Thank you for this opportunity, Katie.
Oh, you are so welcome, Dr. Brown. Thank you so much. And so much of what you said, even that to learn and not to judge, right? I mean, that speaks, that call out right there. Earlier, someone in the chat talked about creating that kind of that psychologically safe space, right? Where people can be part of the data conversations, even though they're not data experts. Everybody should have an opportunity to participate in those data talks and be part of the conversation. So I so love that you just named that, this idea of learning from one another rather than pointing fingers and judging. So thank you. So as well as the student voice, right? Thinking about, so often it's so easy to forget about our students and surveying students or having a focus group with students. We talked about the importance of the qualitative data, right? Hearing their voice and letting them shape both the planning process, but as well as how you implement that plan is so important. So I think with that, we'll go ahead and close out today. I know we're so appreciative of you all taking an hour out of your busy schedules. We've attached here, and I think, Rani, you shared earlier, right? We'll be sharing this slide deck out with folks as well as the recording. So you'll be able to click in here and learn a little bit more about this work, the work that we do with both strategic planning as well as data culture, and this new big idea that Rani and I have about thinking through implementing your strategic plan, borrowing those best practices from both service lines. So with that, we'll say thank you so much for joining us, and almost made it to the end of the week. Tomorrow's Friday. So have a good rest of your week, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. And on your way out, I'm going to put a very short survey in the chat. We would love to hear your thoughts on this new idea that Katie and I kind of came together very quickly on and said, hey, Dr. Brown, can you help us with? Can you help us with this? So please take a moment to complete the survey. I'm putting it in the chat. We will also send it out in the follow-up email as well. Thank you so much, everybody. And thank you, Dr. Brown, as well.